Welcome back to our second installment of the Theology of the Storyteller. Unfortunately, I just realized that my camera doesn't work on my computer. Thank you, Windows 11, but we'll do the best that we can. So if you can see, for those who are viewing this not in live, I have no idea what I'm doing because I don't do this very often, recording on the screen. So we'll just have to carry on our best way. So if you remember, we have our heroes, our sort of artists who will be helping us on this journey. On the left, we have Peter Jackson, and then J.R.R. Tolkien, and of course Howard Shore, who is the musician for the 11 hours of video for The Lord of the Rings. Peter Jackson, if you are curious, he is the soldier of Rohan throwing a spear during the Battle of Helm's Deep. So if you're looking for him, there he is in the movie. Let's just do a quick recap of what our last presentation was all about. So if you remember, and by the way, a recapitulation, this is used in Scripture of Christ. Christ is the great recapitulator. He's the one who recapitulates, he recaptures, takes in all things into himself. He summarizes it, sort of, and that's also where we get the word recap. It's a fitting, I think it's fitting for us to do some sort of theological parlance too with some of these talks. Okay, so if on the left, you'll remember that that is the Pantheon. And the Pantheon is a good example of one of our great points from last time, is that Tolkien is baptizing pagan myth. And this is in a long tradition of the church. The church is always baptizing pagan things, bringing secular things into holy usage, sanctifying it. The Pantheon is a great example of this. But there's also several other things. We talk about church music, the chants and so forth, but also philosophy. Think of the Greeks and how a lot of Plato was baptized by Aristotle, by Augustine, and then Aristotle is baptized by Thomas Aquinas. Stories we talked about Saint Boniface and the tree and the Christmas tree, and even pagan feasts, they align with Christ's own life, and so they are baptized. They gain a new significance in Christ, and that's what Tolkien is doing. Tolkien is doing this with the pagan myth. Mythology is this genre that is generally divorced from the Christian values, but instead he's taking the good things from the pagan world, based on his history with an affiliation with pagan myths, and he's imbuing it, he's baptizing it with Christian values. And two of the big Christian values that we saw, and I'll move to the picture on the right, if you remember, is death. There's two kinds of death. There's the death to the self. That's the good kind of death. And then there's the death to the conscience. So one is a dying to the ego in order to sacrifice, and we see this. We saw this particularly in the last movie with Frodo and his great fiat. I made a lot of Marian connections last time, but also think about Gandalf. Gandalf sacrificed his life for the good of others. That is death to the ego. But then, on the other hand, there's the death to conscience, and that is a sort of false immortality. True life, this is a very Christian theme. True life is found in giving up one's life for others. But a false life, a slavery of life, this sort of fake life, is one that is promised immortality, but at a great cost to our integrity. And that you see that with the character of Gollum, with the Ringwraiths, with orcs, with the Balrogs, Sauron. All of these characters are less than what they were meant to be. And they, even in the movies, Peter Jackson does a great job of expressing this by making them less than human, less than hobbits, less than elves. That's what orcs and all these other things are. less than angels, Balrogs. They are fallen angels. So they aren't really what they're meant to be. And so they sort of represent this false immortality, this false life. And we're going to continue this theme, definitely in this movie, but there's another level that I want to add on to it in this presentation, and that is with the two terms of magia and goetzea. Magia and goetzea, they are Greek terms that Tolkien himself used, and just a disclaimer to sometimes he would use magia interchangeably with goetzea when he was talking about it, but in general, this is how I interpret Tolkien's letters when he's trying to make a distinction. And C.S. Lewis also talks about this, if I remember correctly. Williams also makes this distinction. Here's a good example of what that looks like. If you look over here on the left, Galadriel is a good example of what magia. It's a good sort of magic, and goetzea is best represented by, I think, the land of Mordor. And I'm going to go into this sort of some disagreements that even Lewis and Tolkien got into about magic, and I'm going to talk a little bit about Harry Potter and all sorts of other things that sort of get at this distinction and how it ties to this continued theme of death and true life. It's very important how Tolkien envisions magic and how he describes it metaphysically. I use that word intentionally. He's trying to describe what and be respectful of the Christian tradition and its understanding of magic, because magic is evil. Humans are not supposed to do magic. So he's very particular about who can do magic, how it works, what it looks like, and he does it through this distinction. So let's get right into it, describing what magia is. Magia, couple other words that maybe could be interchanged with it is enchantment or subcreation. And my basic way of describing this is that magia is using one's powers according to how God is intended, not acting beyond one's own powers that they've been given. So some good examples of that are, I showed the picture of Galadriel and her realm. Her realm is the Nenya. The Nenya ring is sort of this mystical way of preserving her elven land. But that's just it. She's an elf, so she's able to wield the power of that ring. It's sort of a magic that is within the power of an elf to be able to wield that. Another good example of this is the creation of Arda, which this is I can't remember who did this painting. It was done probably 40 years ago by some Australian guy. I can't remember his name, but he did a lot of Tolkien paintings. But this is a creation of Arda with all the angels, the Maya and the Valar, and notice that it's enchanting. It's not domineering. It's life-giving. It's creating according to and with the Song of Iluvatar. Their power is only insofar as Iluvatar is allowed, and therefore it's a sort of magic that is allowable because it's according to their powers. Another good example of this is Gandalf. You might say, well, Gandalf is a man. He's wielding magic, but that's false. Tolkien's very careful, and he describes this in the Silmarillion. Big newsflash, for those who are unfamiliar, Gandalf is not a human. Gandalf is an angel. He's like a guardian angel. He's one of the Maiar, one of the lower angels, like a guardian angel. And so he's able to wield magic because he has that power given by Iluvatar. He's not a human. He's able to use other powers that he has. Another good example of this is the healing power of Aragorn. And this is from, if you remember in the first movie, when Frodo is stabbed by the Morgul blade, Aragorn sort of takes upon himself and his knowledge and his mastery of the world in order to heal Frodo. And you'll see that again, there's a really good example of this in this movie with his taming of Braga, this sort of wild beast. He has this sort of pre-Edenic, this pre-fall, the prelapsarian sort of powers over the world, this sort of magic. And you could think of Adam and Eve before they fell. We would look at them as almost magical creatures, kind of like Tom Bombadil. Tom Bombadil is a good example of this in the books. He's like this magical creature, but really he's not magical at all. He's actually just expressing his powers as God has meant him to have. He doesn't have the diminished powers of the fall. And so he seems to be magical, but it's just magia. It's this sort of subcreative, sharing that he has given by God. Some other good examples, the Ents, they're a good example of magia. They participate in the powers that they have. They are sort of a magical creature. Lembas bread is another good example. Remember, that's an image of the Eucharist, but it has a sort of magical power to it. And in the Silmarillion, in the Unfinished Tales too, I can't remember the story, but it's where they're trying to go to one of the hidden cities in the mountains, and they describe that this lembas bread is this secret recipe that only elves can create, because they have this sort of magical, this extra power that's above what a human can do. It's impossible for a human to make lembas. Same thing with the Light of Arundel, this sort of symbol of the rosary of prayer grace given by Mary, by Galadriel. This is another good example of the subcreation. It's something that's elevating. And since it's the feast of Thomas Aquinas on the 28th, that's January 28th, it's also good, I think, for us to just call upon Thomas Aquinas as a good description of what magia is. And that is that grace elevates or perfects nature. Let me say that again. Grace perfects nature. So nature is uplifted. It is perfected, filled out. Christ even uses this word that the law is fulfilled. It's filled out. That's the actual Greek meaning. It's filled out. It's sort of, if there's any holes in it, it's filled up. And again, just a good example of what magia is. It's this sort of completion, enchantment, subcreation, and an uplifting of creation, not contrary. Maybe one last example of this is it turns the natural into the supernatural without being contranatural, if that makes sense. It's not against nature. It perfects it. It enhances it. All right, let's contrast that with goetzea. Goetzea is actually the Greek word for sorcery, and there's some good examples of this, especially in the movies. And they always exhibit it with power, and that's the reason why it's described that way, especially by Tolkien, is because humans and certain beings are not, they're calling upon powers of which they're not supposed to, and therefore it's evil. And this is actually, if you see up the upper right-hand corner, that's a picture of Dumbledore. That's the wizard from Harry Potter. And this is where the great controversy of Harry Potter comes in. They're all humans wielding magical powers that are not beyond them. Humans are not allowed to do that. It would be tantamount, and then it's glorifying it. It would be tantamount to glorifying murder on the screen. Humans aren't supposed to murder. It's a mortal sin. It's gravely contrary to our internal makeup. Same thing with calling upon powers, and we have to ask, where do those powers come from? Probably demons, right? That's what magic is. It's calling upon powers that are other than God in order to get something done. And Tolkien really relates this. I'm going to talk about this just briefly later, about technology. Technology is also another sort of form of goetzea, this way in which we just say something, kind of like in Harry Potter, and then it's done for us. This sort of power over the world without relying on our own powers that God has given us. Sauron is a great example, obviously, of this. This is a picture of, the reason I use this picture is because this is Sauron in the Hobbit film. He is known as the necromancer. And there's a whole long history in the Silmarillion of where the Numenorians are trying to have this sort of mastery over their lives. Remember this, bringing back the theme of the false death and true life and all those things. Another continuing theme of this is the invoking of Goetia. And Sauron becomes, it's not made explicit, but it's kind of think where he gets his necromancer title is he was helping them in their quest for domination over life, even though they weren't meant to live forever. It was, again, a calling upon powers outside of their reach in the way that God had not intended. And then, of course, the Witch King of Angmar. This is one of the ring wraiths. He's less than a man. He's called upon these powers, and now, because of the magic, he's been enslaved to it. Again, calling upon that last theme. In our modern world, I can just tell all of us that the pill, any pill, but really, if those who are watching this know what kind of pill that is, birth control over our bodies, control over whether we have children or not. This is what technology can do to us. Goetia, calling upon powers which we're not supposed to call upon, having mastery over things of which we are not meant to have mastery. And it's interesting that Tolkien will always really attribute this to like goblins and orcs. Whatever they build cannot be beautiful. Whenever the elves build something with their sub-creative magia, it's always artsy, beautiful, for the perfection of nature. Whereas everything that the orcs build are clever and meant for domineering, and therefore never look pretty. This is also a good commentary on Tolkien's time when the Industrial Revolution and great machines of war were all invented, and the atomic bomb and everything. And really, the environment is a good example of this. How it's being destroyed and conquered, used as an object instead of being used in a stewardship that the Lord had given us. And by the way, this is also why for some reason, and I think it was because of a lot of the Isengard imagery, why hippies really took a liking in the 60s to a lot of Tolkien's work. Tolkien did not like that, by the way. He didn't like the whole drug culture and everything, but just a little tidbit. Another thing is with this Goetia is always, remember with the death to self and the death to conscience, that distinction earlier, whenever we try to exert power over things of which we do not have a right to, it is always reversed and we are taken over, and then we're turned into less human. Remember and there's a few examples that you're going to want to watch in this movie. Remember, we already had seen the wraiths. We had already seen some other examples of this, but Gollum, right? He's less than a hobbit. Saruman is a fallen angel. But also look at, and we'll see this later, there's actually an exorcism in this movie. Theoden, he's like sort of less than a man. And Grima Wormtongue is less than a man because of his being controlled by power, and his addiction to power has warped him. Also, Palantir, I don't know if anyone knows this. It's actually an Elvish word for, in Greek it would be telehorasi. In English we call it television. It's kind of a weird amalgamation of a word of between the Greek and the Latin. But television, it's seeing things from afar. This power over distances, over information, it has a tendency to corrupt. And that's the Palantir. There's many people have connected that, and Tolkien himself connected that through word choice to television. That's what television does to us when we allow ourselves to watch. We garbage in, garbage out. We automatically are poisoning our minds when we let it take control of us and what we watch. A couple other things I just want to point out. Peter Kreeft has this great quote that I just wanted to share with everyone. Power is only the sugar on the bait. Excuse me. Pleasure is the is only the sugar on the bait of power. Any addict knows that. I've got to have it is his philosophy. Not I, but it is master. Gollum is believable because we know him. He is every drug addict. He is, in fact, every addict, which means that he is every man. For we are all addicted to something that we cannot part with that is less than God. And notice throughout this movie how Gollum has lost his personhood. He's lost his hobbitness. He's been reduced because the ring is now his precious. There's another good quote on this. It is the ring that is now the precious. And Gollum has lost his preciousness, his value. He has become its slave, and it has become his master. In fact, it has become the self, the person, the subject. And notice how Gollum throughout this movie will even talk about it that way. He even says, and ironically, the readings on the 28th are when the demons speak, what have you to do with us? The demonic is always plural. It's even though there's one spirit, there's something almost schizophrenic about the nature of evil. It tends to turn the self into an object, and it turns our object of addiction into a self. It reverses the role. And again, this is a Goetia thing. Goetia, it reverses when we think that we're mastering over creation, we're exerting our mastery over it. Really what it's doing is exerting its mastery over us, because it's outside of what God has intended. Therefore, by definition, it will be destructive. It doesn't lead to the oneness with God. In fact, it has become the self, the person, the subject, the actor, and Gollum has become its passive object. It's it. There, famously in 1955, Tolkien was interviewed, and the interview said, "What makes you tick, Professor Tolkien?" And he says, "I don't tick. I am not a machine." He actually says, "But if I did, you should probably ask the wine master, the one who's winding me." This is a good just example of this Goetia thing, that he hates how the world tends to mechanize man, just turn everything into just inputs and outputs, magic, sorcery, just being able to do something without the subject. Again, technology is another example of this Goetia, of how we exert mastery in ways that we're not supposed to over the world. And he was famously against this over mechanization of the world, over technology, famously too. And his first, when they tried to record an interview, he said the Pater Noster, the Our Father in Latin, as a sort of exorcism over the device. Eventually he gave in and had it recorded, but I think just a natural suspicion over technology and how it has controlled us. Some things I forgot from last time. Some of our main characters, this is kind of my own theory. I've never read this anywhere, but I just can't help but see it. If you remember the Balrog, he's a big bad guy from the first one. Saruman is a big bad guy, from the second one, the movie we're watching today. And then also the Eye of Sauron. If you remember, all of these are actually fallen angels. They're Balrog is a Maiar, Saruman is a Maiar. They're all Maiars. They are, however, a good theory that I think it's kind of cool. It matches up actually very well with the book of Revelation. We just maybe think about that. Sort of the end of the age, end of the third age, end of the world, the new coming of the king, new kingdom. In the book of Revelation, there's the beast, right? The Balrog, the Antichrist, right? The one who imitates the Christ figure, right? Like Gandalf. That's Saruman. He's the Antichrist. And then lastly is Satan. These sort of the unholy trinity, the inverse of what God is, an imitation of what God is. Something I forgot this is just a famous theory on the Lord of the Rings, and actually Tolkien agreed with this. He thought it was a good way to look at his work. But Christ the priest, Frodo, he carries the burden of the ring. And notice during this movie how how the ring is sort of bearing on him. It gets heavier. It's a weight to bear. And then also Gandalf you'll see a lot of Christ imagery in this movie. I don't want to spoil it, but just a lot of resurrection themes of how his character is interpreted in a Christ-like way. And then Aragorn, of course, the king. So Christ, the priest, prophet, and king. Other things to look out for in this movie. Just some other things to maybe of interest is this is actually a miniature set. So if you ever wonder how they did all these Isengard sort of shots, a lot of it was done on this mini set. Other couple of things interesting. This guy on the left that without the eye, he's actually one of the extras, paid to actors. He was missing an eye, and they were going to cover it up or whatever, and they're like, wow, that would actually look kind of cool in the scene. So that he got a little cameo because he looks rustic and northern and Rohanian. And then also the Uruk-hai, they actually ran out of 6-foot Uruk-hai, so they cast 5-foot men to play the Uruk-hai, and their nickname on set was the Uruk-lows. So that's kind of funny. And yes, during the movie, please, everyone knows that Viggo Mortensen broke his toe when he kicked this helmet in this scene. So take it from me now. You don't have to say it during the movie. Yes, I know that he broke his toes. He broke his toes right here. All right, I said it. Now you don't have to say it during the movie. Everyone tells me that, wow, you're doing this big Lord of the Rings thing. I'm a big Lord of the Rings fan. In fact, I know all this trivia. Did you know that Viggo Mortensen broke his toes? Yes, I do. I do know that. So please don't say it. There it is. You saw it. Also, this is one of my favorite orcs in this movie. I just laugh every time I see that. So look out for that, and you'll see one of Father Weller's favorite orcs to look at. Again, there's an exorcism in this movie. I just really want to point out that Theoden's arc, his character arc, is not done after the exorcism. This is a good example of how Christ works on us. Christ will pull out the demons out of us. He'll heal us. But a lot of times our journey is not just done with that one. And we know this when we feel the calling of Christ or he does something profound in us. He's not done with his work. And we're works in progress. And Theoden's big arc has to do, in large part, an opposite. Remember, I'm talking about baptizing pagan virtues. It's one of our first themes right at the beginning of the presentation. He's really opposite of Eowyn. So Theoden is so ashamed of death that he seeks shame. Notice this, how he hides, even though he's healed, he's still tied to this sort of, he's tied to his fear, and then he's tempted to turn that shame into a pagan virtue of glorifying death. But spoiler alert, it's not granted him in the way that he thought. So just keep that in mind, that he's seeking shame, he's seeking to hide. But Eowyn, a woman in the court, she is so ashamed of shame, she even talks about being in a cage and being not being with the men, not being able to fight, that she seeks death. So she's learning her place and learning that that's a beautiful thing, whereas he's hiding. So both of them are going to have great character arcs, but they're opposite of each other. And that's all I have for you today. So God bless.